Hello everyone, and welcome to my Young and the Restless official 24 channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kane acknowledges the true plan behind Kyle's ring and engagement dinner for Claire. While Kane Ashby confesses his true plan, Kyle Abbott will get Claire Newman a ring and organize an engagement dinner. Although Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott will attempt to sabotage Kyle's proposal plan at Society, he will be adamant about popping the question and demonstrating his love for Claire. Indeed, shortly after, Kyle will meet with the Abbott family jeweler to choose a ring that he is certain Claire will like. We'll see Kyle beaming with self-assurance as he looks forward to choosing wedding bands shortly. Claire will then confide in Nikki Newman on Friday's Y&R episode, wondering how she should proceed with Kyle at this point. Claire will be urged by Nikki to deliberate for a while, but she will also bring up her past relationship with Victor Newman. Nikki can rely on his affection, even if Victor has undoubtedly made his share of poor choices and blunders. Claire will accept Nikki's point of view and admit that Kyle is a decent man. Additionally, Claire will be given the junior role at Newman Publishing, which is being merged with Chancellor, by Nikki. The intention is for Claire to be moved by the idea of running it like Cole Howard did. Kyle will detest the tension between them when Claire runs into him at Crimson Lights later. Kyle will insist on having a chance to show Claire that she can trust him once more and that they can work things out over dinner. Kyle is secretly looking forward to popping the question and proposing to Claire, who will accept the offer. When Billy Abbott returns to Society, he will brief Jack and Diane about Kane's plans to abandon his takeover plans. However, Jack and Diane will not believe Kane and will still pursue Chancellor. Michelle Stafford's character, Phyllis Summers, will not allow Kane to take advantage of her on the train. Phyllis will contend that the plan is on hold rather than cancelled because Kane will explain that he must concentrate on making amends with his children at this time. Kane will encourage Phyllis to move on, though, and offer to assist her by making some business calls. Phyllis is prepared to accept the brunt of the criticism and will prefer to continue with Kane's GC dominance scheme. She will demand Kane's plan information so she can proceed when Phyllis says she can be the vulture. Kane won't be able to respond to her at this time, but Phyllis will continue to urge that she can handle all the dirty labor while his hands remain clean. Phyllis will encourage Amanda Sinclair to reason with Kane when she appears. Amanda will have a private conversation with Kane and question whether his desire to abandon his takeover ambitions is sincere. Kane will acknowledge that his new strategy is for Billy and Phyllis to inform others about his retreat, giving him an opportunity to mend his relationship with the twins. He will promise to make his move while Kane is out of the spotlight, but he will say it will be an unexpected one. Kane Ashby knew he was walking a razor's edge the moment he began to acknowledge the true plan simmering beneath the surface, one he had carefully concealed from allies and enemies alike, but the truth could not stay buried forever. Especially not in Genoa City where secrets had a way of clawing themselves into the light, and as Kane quietly confessed the outlines of his strategy, Kyle Abbott was simultaneously preparing to sweep Claire Newman into his world with an engagement dinner and a glittering ring that he was certain would symbolize redemption, renewal, and a second chance at love. Kyle, with all his restless charm and impulsive determination, had convinced himself that a grand gesture was the only way to repair the fragile trust between him and Claire. Yet he underestimated the turbulence of his family's interference and the storm gathering from Kane's relentless ambition, because while Kyle's heart was pounding with hope at the thought of slipping that ring onto Claire's finger at Society, Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott were already scheming behind the scenes, quietly plotting to derail his plans in the belief that Kyle was rushing blindly into a union that would destabilize not only his emotional life but also the balance of power within the Abbott clan, though Kyle, stubborn to the core, remained adamant, brushing off warnings and objections as he marched toward what he saw as his destiny with Claire. Indeed, his first step was a clandestine visit to the Abbott family jeweler, where he studied trays of dazzling diamonds, his eyes lighting up as he finally settled on a ring he was sure Claire would adore, a symbol that carried both weight and promise, the kind of token that suggested permanence and a bold leap into the future. And as Kyle beamed with boyish confidence, imagining the day he and Claire would choose wedding bands together, Claire herself was wrestling with doubts, confiding in Nikki Newman later that week about whether she could truly trust Kyle after his missteps and secrets, her voice wavering as she admitted her heart wanted to believe in him, but her mind whispered caution. Nikki, ever the seasoned advisor who had navigated Victor Newman's tempestuous love, more times than she could count, urged Claire to pause and reflect, reminding her that even Victor, with all his flaws and failures, had a love that endured, and if Kyle was genuinely committed, he deserved the opportunity to prove it, a perspective Claire reluctantly accepted, conceding that Kyle, for all his recklessness, was indeed a decent man trying to right his wrongs. And as Nikki revealed her plans to merge Newman Publishing with Chancellor and elevate Claire into a junior role that evoked memories of how Cole Howard once managed the company with passion and precision, Claire felt a spark of empowerment, tempted by the chance to carve her own legacy while still questioning how her personal life might entangle with her professional future. Meanwhile, the tension thickened as Claire later bumped into Kyle at Crimson Lights, their conversation tinged with awkwardness, regret, and determination, with Kyle imploring her to give him one more chance, promising dinner, honesty, and an unshakable vow to rebuild trust, all while secretly rehearsing the words of his proposal and envisioning the look of surprise and joy on her face when he finally revealed the ring. And in a twist of fate, Claire would eventually agree to the dinner, unaware of the elaborate engagement dinner Kyle was preparing, setting the stage for a night that would blend romance with turmoil as family schemes threatened to unravel his plan. At the same time, Billy Abbott returned to society with news he believed might ease the pressure, telling Jack and Diane that Kane had apparently decided to abandon his Chancellor takeover ambitions, but Jack and Diane, long hardened to Kane's slippery maneuverings, dismissed Billy's optimism, convinced Kane's retreat was only a facade, and thus they resolved to keep fighting to protect Chancellor from any encroachment, refusing to let down their guard, which proved wise because Kane's so-called retreat was already layered with deception. Elsewhere, Phyllis Summers, fiery and unwilling to let opportunity pass her by, confronted Kane on the train, challenging his claim that the scheme was cancelled, insisting she knew him too well to believe he would simply surrender his ambitions, but Kane, playing his part, explained that his children required his focus, that repairing his fractured family came before corporate warfare, an excuse laced with just enough truth to sound convincing, though Phyllis saw through it, countering that the plan wasn't cancelled but merely on hold, and if Kane wasn't ready to lead the charge, she could be the vulture who circled above and took the spoils for herself. Her sharp words hung in the air as she demanded Kane hand over the details, insisting she could carry out the dirty work while his hands remained clean, a proposition Kane neither confirmed nor denied, choosing instead to let silence work in his favor. But Phyllis, relentless, refused to drop the matter, vowing she would not be left behind. In the shadows, it was at this volatile moment that Amanda Sinclair reappeared, drawn into the chaos as Phyllis urged her to reason with Kane, to pry out of him the truth of his intentions, and in a private exchange, Amanda pressed Kane with sharp questions, asking if his retreat from the takeover was genuine or merely another sleight of hand, and Kane, caught between candor and control, finally admitted the contours of his true plan, that by allowing Billy and Phyllis to spread the narrative of his withdrawal, he would create the illusion of weakness, a smokescreen that would lower defenses and allow him to quietly rebuild bridges with his children while simultaneously laying the groundwork for a shocking, unexpected move when no one was watching, a confession that revealed his cunning patience and his willingness to weaponize silence itself. And while Amanda listened with wary eyes, recognizing both the brilliance and the danger of his gambit, Kane's words carried the weight of inevitability, suggesting that even in retreat he was never truly retreating, only preparing the battlefield anew. Thus, the tapestry of schemes and desires wove tighter, with Kyle racing toward a romantic proposal that could either bind him to Claire forever or shatter beneath the meddling hands of Jack and Diane, Claire balancing her cautious heart with newfound career prospects under Nikki's mentorship, Phyllis scheming to seize power by piggybacking on Kane's ambitions, Amanda stepping back into Kane's orbit at a critical moment, and Kane himself playing the long game, his true plan unfolding in whispers and shadows, ensuring that while Genoa City's eyes were fixed on Kyle's glittering ring and engagement dinner, the real story was the silent storm Kane was preparing to unleash, one that would redefine alliances, fracture families, and remind everyone that in this town, nothing is ever as it seems, and no plan is ever truly abandoned, only delayed until the moment of maximum impact. As the threads of Genoa City's tangled web tightened, Kane Ashby's acknowledgement of his true plan was like a ghost whispering through the corridors of power, unseen yet deeply felt, for while his lips had confessed the broad strokes to Amanda Sinclair in a moment of calculated vulnerability, he had not revealed the full scale of his intentions to anyone, not even to Phyllis Summers, who prided herself on being able to read his moves before he made them. And as Amanda weighed his words with a lawyer's skepticism and a woman's intuition, Kane leaned back, his calm demeanor concealing the firestorm in his mind, picturing the day when the Abbott family, Chancellor executives, and perhaps even Newman loyalists would be blindsided by a strike so subtle they would only recognize it after the pieces had shifted beyond repair. Yet even as Kane set his trap in silence, the Abbott family was consumed by Kyle Abbott's determined push to solidify his future with Claire Newman, with Kyle rehearsing his proposal like an actor perfecting his lines, certain that the combination of a ring, a candlelit dinner, and a public declaration would erase past betrayals. Though Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott were sharpening their knives behind the scenes, strategizing about how to stop the engagement without alienating Kyle completely, for their love for him was genuine but clouded by fear that Claire's complicated past and Kyle's impulsive heart would end in heartbreak or scandal. Jack, pacing the Abbott living room, muttered that Kyle was thinking with his emotions rather than his head, while Diane, her voice low and dripping with maternal worry, insisted they had to intercept him before he set his plan in stone, yet neither could agree on how far to go, torn between preserving family harmony and sabotaging what they saw as a dangerous match. But Kyle, ever the defiant son, had already ordered the ring, envisioning the sparkle in Claire's eyes when he presented it at society, where he had reserved a corner table, arranged for soft music, and instructed the staff to prepare champagne, believing every detail mattered if he was to win Claire's heart back in grand style. Meanwhile, Claire herself wrestled with conflicting emotions, confiding once again in Nikki Newman, whose calm wisdom served as both comfort and challenge. For Nikki reminded her that love required trust, patience, and a willingness to forgive, lessons Claire absorbed but struggled to apply to Kyle, whose past secrecy still gnawed at her trust, though she admitted that his determination moved her, and Nikki, smiling faintly, advised her to remember that even Victor Newman, a man who built empires and made catastrophic mistakes, had proven himself capable of enduring love, a point that resonated with Claire as she realized that perfect partners did not exist, only imperfect ones who fought to stay together. And Nikki further distracted her with news of her upcoming junior role at the newly merged Newman Publishing and Chancellor, planting seeds of ambition in Claire's mind, for the role was not just a job but an invitation to step into a legacy, once held by Cole Howard, a man whose name still lingered in the Newman household like an echo from the past. And Claire, feeling the weight of responsibility, considered how her career and relationship might collide, especially under the scrutiny of Genoa City's watchful eyes. Later, when she encountered Kyle at Crimson Lights, the tension was palpable, their conversation a tug-of-war between past wounds and future hopes, with Kyle promising he could be better, insisting their love deserved another chance, and though Claire hesitated, she ultimately agreed to meet him for dinner, unaware of his true intention to propose, setting the stage for a moment that could either heal or shatter them. But across town, Billy Abbott was weaving his own narrative, telling Jack and Diane that Kane had allegedly abandoned his Chancellor takeover scheme, news he thought would ease their paranoia. But Jack and Diane were unconvinced, certain that Kane's so-called retreat was nothing but misdirection, and they were right. For Kane's confession to Amanda revealed he was only waiting for the perfect moment to resurface with devastating force. In the meantime, Phyllis Summers refused to let go of her own ambitions, pressing Kane with relentless energy, arguing that she could carry out the plan herself if he lacked the stomach to do so, positioning herself as the vulture willing to do the dirty work while Kane preserved his clean reputation. And though Kane neither confirmed nor denied her offer, his silence emboldened Phyllis, who interpreted it as tacit approval, and in her fiery determination, she envisioned herself standing atop Genoa City's corporate mountain, even if it meant alienating allies or drawing the ire of the Abbotts. Amanda, ever the voice of reason, cautioned Phyllis to slow down, reminding her that Kane's strategy was built on patience, deception, and timing, but Phyllis scoffed, claiming she had no intention of waiting in the wings while others reaped the rewards, her competitive nature pushing her toward reckless decisions, and Kane, observing this dynamic, realized he could use both women to his advantage, Amanda's rationality to temper his risks and Phyllis's aggression to stir chaos in his enemy's ranks, thus deepening his control while appearing to step back. Meanwhile, preparations for Kyle's engagement dinner pressed forward, the staff at society buzzing with whispered excitement about the surprise proposal, though rumors of Diane and Jack's interference began to swirl, hinting at a confrontation that could derail the night. And as the fateful evening approached, Kane stood at the edge of the storm, knowing that while all eyes would be on Kyle and Claire, his silence, his retreat, his carefully cultivated absence, was the true story, because in Genoa City, power often belonged not to those who shouted loudest but to those who waited, unseen, until the moment came to strike. And Kane, with Amanda's cautious support, and Phyllis's reckless hunger, was poised to prove that the most dangerous man in town was not the one making public declarations of love but the one smiling quietly in the shadows, waiting for everyone else to underestimate him. The night of Kyle Abbott's grand engagement dinner finally arrived, a moment he had been rehearsing in his mind for days, one he imagined would rewrite his history with Claire Newman and prove once and for all that love, even fractured love, could be repaired through bold declarations and glittering promises. And as society transformed into a backdrop of romance with flickering candles, a carefully chosen menu, and staff instructed to deliver perfection down to the last champagne bubble, Kyle stood at the entrance, the ring box heavy in his pocket, his heart racing with the thrill of anticipation, unaware that forces were already conspiring against him. For Diane Jenkins Abbott and Jack Abbott had slipped quietly into the restaurant with a plan to sabotage his proposal, not through outright confrontation but through subtle psychological maneuvers, intending to rattle him before he could kneel and make his declaration, believing that sowing doubt at the critical moment might delay or even derail his impulsive leap into marriage. Yet what they underestimated was Kyle's resolve, hardened by the thought of losing Claire forever. And as Claire arrived, elegant and composed though slightly anxious, Kyle felt a surge of determination, taking her hand and leading her to the private table he had orchestrated, his eyes shining with both love and nerves. Meanwhile, Nikki Newman, though not present, lingered in Claire's thoughts, her advice echoing like a quiet drumbeat reminding her to weigh love against caution, to consider the scars of the past before embracing the promises of the future. And Claire, seated across from Kyle, studied him carefully, wondering if this grand spectacle was a genuine act of devotion or another example of Kyle papering over deep issues with flash and extravagance. Though her heart fluttered nonetheless at his intensity, her conflicting emotions battling for dominance. Across the room, Diane whispered to Jack that they needed to act soon, that Kyle was clearly building toward his proposal, and Jack, torn between his son's happiness and his own protective instincts, finally agreed, deciding they would confront Kyle privately before the ring appeared. Yet before they could move, Kyle rose to his feet, tapped his glass, and began a speech that hushed the entire room, speaking with raw emotion about mistakes made, lessons learned, and a love he refused to abandon, words that carried such sincerity that even some of the diners not involved felt moved, and Claire, her breath catching, realized where this was heading just as Kyle pulled the ring box from his pocket and opened it with trembling hands, revealing a dazzling diamond that sparkled in the candlelight like a promise of forever, prompting audible gasps from the crowd. Diane, nearly panicked, squeezed Jack's arm, urging him to stop it, but Jack hesitated, caught between admiration for his son's courage and fear of the fallout, while Claire stared at the ring, torn between the part of her that wanted to believe in second chances and the part that still feared betrayal, her silence stretching for what felt like an eternity until Kyle finally broke it with a heartfelt plea for her to marry him, his voice cracking with vulnerability. In that suspended moment, the entire Abbott family drama, Newman loyalties, and even Kane Ashby's hidden schemes seemed to fade into the background, as all eyes locked on Claire, waiting for her decision. But just as her lips parted, the door of society opened, and in strode Billy Abbott, unaware of the delicate timing, but carrying news that would shift the undercurrent of the night. For Billy, after days of prying and speculation, had stumbled upon hints that Kane's retreat from Chancellor's takeover wasn't as clean as it appeared, and he intended to warn Jack immediately, oblivious that Kyle's proposal was in progress. And when he caught sight of the scene unfolding, his startled expression spoke volumes, distracting Claire just long enough for hesitation to reassert itself. Kyle, visibly irritated, tried to push through, begging Claire to answer, while Diane seized the moment to interject, gently suggesting to Claire that rushing into such a binding choice might not be wise, her voice honeyed but laced with manipulation. And Jack, though softer in his delivery, echoed his wife's sentiment, urging Kyle to slow down, to consider that marriage was not a solution but a commitment that required time and patience, their intervention effectively smothering the momentum Kyle had built. leaving Claire caught in a whirlwind of love, doubt, and external pressure. Sensing the tide turning, Kyle clenched his jaw, his frustration boiling beneath his polished exterior, vowing silently that his family would not rob him of happiness, and Claire, overwhelmed, asked for time, her voice trembling as she said she needed to think, which drew a visible slump from Kyle, who had envisioned a triumphant yes but now faced an agonizing maybe. Across town, Kane Ashby learned of the scene at society through a well-placed informant, and though he smiled faintly at the irony of the Abbotts tripping over their own dysfunction, he recognized the moment's importance, for Kyle's hesitation-induced humiliation could ripple into business and family dealings, weakening Abbott unity at a time when Kane needed them fractured. And as Amanda Sinclair sat across from him in his office, she remarked that fate seemed to be handing him exactly what he wanted without him lifting a finger, but Kane corrected her with a quiet intensity, saying fate was only useful to those prepared to seize it, and he was, for while the Abbotts wrestled with love and loyalty, he was positioning himself as the silent predator, letting Phyllis Summers create noise while he slipped beneath notice, orchestrating moves through proxies and alliances that would one day snap into place like a trap. Phyllis, meanwhile, still demanded details, cornering Kane with arguments about how she could be his vulture, the scavenger who picked apart Chancellor piece by piece. While his hands remained unsullied, and Kane, though amused, finally offered her a breadcrumb, suggesting that if she wanted to prove her value,